Right, we are on the home stretch of this chapter, on page 27a, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. The last section of the Mishnah to be analyzed before we go to the next chapter is the Mishnah which discussed this idea that the Beth Din steps in to issue a warning in a case where the husband is incapacitated. Husband is in jail, husband is overseas or himself otherwise mentally incapable. A number of different scenarios, which we'll review presently. But these are all cases in which a woman is suspect of a relationship that would require that she be warned and thus begin the Sotah process, but the husband, for whatever reason, is incapable of doing so. And you'll remember when we discussed the Mishnah, we discussed how there's a balance to be had between protecting him and protecting her, right? He's incapable of issuing a warning, so the Beis Din will step in. Right, to protect him. Then there was an element of protecting her. Do you remember we discussing this? Maybe it'll come back. Sorry?
You could have warned her and stepped in.
Maybe that was, maybe it was the idea. No, she does do the right thing to it. Maybe that we don't take her to drink the Sotah water unless the husband does the warning, at least according to one opinion. Okay, so maybe that will come up. Let's see. So the Gemara is going to analyze this discussion, elaborate on it, and cite to the verses that help us understand the scriptural source for this idea. And with that, the Gemara is going to conclude this chapter. So let's begin. So first, as the Gemara always does, it quotes or cites to the relevant section of the Mishnah. It states, "Ve'elu shebeis din, etc." These are the cases in which the Beis Din would step in. Now the Gemara gets straight to the Mishnah, another Mishnaic age text, which elaborates in our Mishnah, right? This is commonly the case, as we've discussed here numerous times. The Mishnah is a compilation of texts and of people's notes from the generations prior, as they recorded their teachings that they heard from their teachers as part of the oral tradition going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, going back to Moses at Sinai. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi collected these texts, these manuscripts, and edited and put them together. So we have many Mishnaic age texts, the Tosefta and the Breita, other such places, which are other collections of these same texts, but not as definite, not as what's the word? Not as halachically, I don't know what's the word, not as conclusive or as condensed as the Mishnah as we have it, which is why the Mishnah serves as the primary text. But when you want to understand the Mishnah, the Gemara will often compare it to another Mishnaic age text, which is more elaborate than the Mishnah itself, and that's what the Gemara does here. So Tana Rabbanan, our sages taught, Ish, the verse states, when a man will warn his wife because she is straying. That's what the verse says. Okay, well that's perfectly sound. You begin with stating a man who wants to warn his wife. That would be the way to introduce this case, this law, this mitzvah. But ma Talmud Leimar ish ish. Why did the verse repeat the word ish? A man. Now in English, it's hard to translate the word or double expression in the verse, ish, ish, man, man. That's what the literal translation would be, which is kind of awkward in English. But in biblical Hebrew, if you want to say each and every man, you would just say the word man twice, man, man. So if you want to say each and every woman, you would say isha, isha. Right? You have it, in the Megillah, it says v'chol ish v'isha. It says v'chol, every. But it's not uncommon that when you want to say each and every, you would just say the word twice. So when the Gemara does that, when the verse does that, it must mean that we should expand the definition here to include perhaps a little bit more. We've done this exercise earlier as well.
Yeah.
So the Gemara therefore says, or this Mishnah text we're quoting, says, Rabbi, this double expression comes to include Eishes Chedesh, the wife of a mute, the Eishes Sotah, and the wife of someone who is a halachic imbecile, right? That is to say that he's lacks the cognitive capacity to be able to warn his wife. And likewise, the Eishes She'imum, which, if I remember correctly, I'm looking it up again. This morning, and it slipped my mind. Another, no, that's basically Sudim, but there's a case before that, which, if I'm not mistaken, is someone who someone had like a nervous breakdown. Yeah, an insane person. Yeah, someone had a nervous breakdown. So these people who are now likewise, someone whose husband went overseas. And going overseas isn't like today where you can just call the guy and text the guy and see how he's doing. Going overseas meant we don't know if the person is going to come back, or when he's going to come back, and so on. And likewise, if the husband was locked in jail. So we have the wife of a mute, the wife of an imbecile, halachic imbecile, the wife of someone who had a mental breakdown, the wife of someone who's overseas, and the wife of someone who is in jail. All these men are incapable of warning their husbands for one reason or another. And we discussed already in our Mishnah that. Sorry? Yeah. He lacks the cognitive ability to be able to warn his wife. You see, either technically he can't because he's deaf and mute, or he lacks the cognitive ability to be able to warn his wife, or he can't because he's not around. So he has no idea what's going on with his wife because he's stuck in jail. And as we discussed in the Mishnah, stuck in jail should not lead us to conclude that the husband is in any way at fault of any immorality. There's 1,001 reasons why a Jew in history would end up in jail. And unfortunately, the majority of those reasons are not legal per se or even moral. It's just the way of history where Jews were put in jail for a variety of reasons. Couldn't pay the rent, or just because refused to bow down to the local god or whatnot. But even if it is a case of a person in jail for a legitimate reason, it would still be reason enough to step in and warn the wife against promiscuity. So these are the cases, shebezdin mekana lahem, where the bezdin steps in and issues the warning on behalf of the husband, warning the wife if they see that she's going down a path that will lead her to decisions that she might regret herself. So a warning is issued. And of what consequence is this warning? Says the Mishnah text, to invalidate them from the ketubah. So they're behaving promiscuously. So should they lose the ketubah? As we explained here, the ketubah is a financial bind that keeps the husband tethered to the marriage. The entire point of the ketubah is to protect the wife against a man who just marries a person, does what he wants, and then throws her a get, and she's on the street now. So to protect a woman against that, the Torah or our sages instituted that the ketubah, so that if he wants a divorce, no problem, it's going to cost you. And therefore you'll think twice before you think it's something worthwhile. But if a woman is behaving promiscuously, then why would we tether him to the marriage? We might even encourage a divorce. But in order to make her lose a ketubah, as we've established already in a previous Gemara where we discussed this at length, in order for her to lose a ketubah, we established that he has to warn her. He has to warn her. So in this case, he can't warn her. So because he can't warn her, therefore he's got to pay out to a woman who's been behaving promiscuously behind his back. Doesn't seem very fair. So the sages the best one will step in and give the warning. And in this way, if it comes to divorce, he doesn't have to pay out the ketubah, considering that she was behaving promiscuously. And his incapability to give a warning should not therefore mean that it cost them all that money to divorce her, when perhaps we even encourage divorce. Right? This is where we're protecting him.
That's the balance.
That's right.
Well, as you started off, protection of
Both parties. That's right. So now on the other hand, Yachal Aflash Gaisa, perhaps then this warning at the best in issues is strong enough to begin the Sotah proceedings to the point that she then be taken to the temple to drink the water. So that far, that kind of authority is not given to the Beth Din. The Beth Din is only given the authority to warn her, and in this way she'll lose the right to the ketubah if she doesn't correct her behavior. But it's not strong enough, or the Beth Din's authority isn't far enough that she would then be taken to the temple to drink the Sotah water. I guess this is the protection of her, and that considering that it's not between her and her husband because her husband's not around, and maybe the fact that her husband's not around is why she ended up in this compromised situation, because she's alone. Her husband's overseas, her husband's in jail, her husband had a nervous breakdown, and there's immense pressure. So maybe a warning that she shouldn't behave promiscuously. On the other hand, not so far as to take her to the temple with all the humiliation that comes along with that. So where do we know that the Beth Din's authority does not reach to the point that she's taken to the temple? Talmud Lemar comes the verse and tells us, the husband will bring his wife to the temple, and then she will drink the water, and so on. We've analyzed this mention. That's right. But this is the source for that. When we analyzed the Gemara earlier, we were citing to this text here. So the husband brings his wife, not the Beth Din. The husband has to be the husband must be the one to take his wife to the temple for the Sotah proceeding to be implemented. But here it's the Beth Din, and therefore cannot be done. This is the verse. Sorry, what did you say? Yeah, the court's warning is strong enough for her to potentially lose a ketubah, but not enough to take her to the temple to drink the Sotah water. But there's a dissenting opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, the warning is strong enough even to begin the Sotah proceeding to the point that she can be taken to the temple to drink. Now, as to the verse which says that the husband must bring her to the temple to drink, explains Rabbi Yossi, and when the husband comes out of jail, or likewise if he comes back from overseas, or if he regains his cognitive ability or whatever it is, then Yashkena, then he can take her to the temple to drink, which means the Beth Din issues the warning, and then the husband, relying on the Beth Din's warning, will take his wife to the temple if she violated that warning.
So is he qualifying it in some cases? It depends on whether or not the person becomes sane again or.
I just choose to add that it's not state.
Blanket statement.
See, that's a good question, and I added that. But the literal words of Rabbi Yossi are, when the husband comes out of jail, he will take her to drink the water. It's only one case, but we have many cases. I'm expanding it to go to the other cases because I don't see why not.
Wow.
And in fact, I would argue even that in the case of the mute, he wouldn't even have to be able to talk. If the Beth Din issued the warning, he can still take it to the temple. Actually, no. We're going to see soon why maybe not. No, so I'm sorry. I take that back. We'll see soon maybe why not. Why he has to be able to start speaking. We'll see soon.
Wow.
We'll get that in a minute. Well, it's possible for a person to come back to that. So the person regains his cognitive ability. The person had a nervous breakdown. He goes to the hospital, gets treated, and comes back to his normal self. So I would argue that he has to regain his cognitive ability. I don't see. It's hard for me to believe that, in general, someone of that nature, Torah doesn't put obligations on them. So it's hard for me to see that before he regains his cognitive ability, he would take it to the temple.
This means people who are not only have the ability, but actually do get released from prison. Or
Yes. That's what. Even though Rabbi doesn't say so explicitly, I would. That's right. But I would say that that's correct. I'm sure there's commentaries on this, but I would say that that's correct. Okay. So this is the end of the Mishnah Gauge text, and now comes the Gemara's analysis. The Gemara says, I'll leave it for, let's see. The Maikam Mithli. Gemara asks, what is the, I can take this, press 6. What is the root of their dispute? Right? The verse seems to say, okay, if you stop ringing, it means someone in the office got it, so you can read it. Yeah, if you stop ringing, it means someone, otherwise the phone will keep ringing. Okay, so Maikam Mithli. What then is the root of their argument? They're both looking at the same verse. The verse says that, well, there's two parts to the verse. The verse says, ish, each and every man. Each and every man is expansive. Okay, so we include the Beth Din in that too, in the case where the husband can't. Right. Now they're also looking at the same verse, which says that the husband brings his wife to the temple, which means the husband has to do that. So where's the root of their dispute? In that Rabbi Yossi also agrees the husband has to be the one to bring it to the temple, but for some reason, he's of the view that the husband doesn't have to issue the warning in order to take her to the temple. The Beth Din does issues the warning, and then he can go take her to the temple later when he comes out of jail. But the sages say the Beth Din issues the warning, and that's not enough for the husband to take her to the temple. If the husband wanted to take her to the temple, he'd have to issue his own warning. So what's the root of that dispute? So says the Gemara, Rabbanan Sabri, the sages are of the view, Ba'inan, we require the Kina Vehevi. He warned, he takes. Because the verse describes, and he warned, and he takes, he warns her about, etc. He takes her to the temple, etc. So that it has to be the same he. That's their sage's view. Because the verse uses this kind of narrative. He warns her, and then he takes her to the temple. So even though when it came to the warning, we expanded it and said that even the Beth Din could do the warning, but nonetheless, because the narrative is written such as he warns, he takes her, it must be the same person doing both. And therefore, only in an instance where he warns, can he then take her to the temple. But if the Beth Din warns, okay, she loses a ketubah because she violated a warning. But because he's the one that has to take her to the temple, then he's the one that has to issue the warning. So if he wants to take her to the temple, he'd have to issue another warning after he regained his cognitive ability or after he came out of jail, issue another warning, and then take her to the temple after that violation.
That's the sage's view.
Sage's view.
Rabbi Yossi
Savar. That's right.
You can still bring her to the temple.
That's right. That's right. Rabbi Yossi Savar, the basis of the view, we don't need to substantiate this narrative where he warns and he takes her. Warning is one law, and over there we expand it to the point to include Beth Din. And bringing to the temple is another law. And there it says only husband. And as long as the two laws are satisfied, that's fine. The law of warning is satisfied because the Beth Din did it. And the law of taking to the temple is satisfied because he takes it. Even though it says he warns, he takes, it's not one narrative. It's two distinct laws. Warning has its one set of law, which includes the Beth Din, and taking to the temple is another set of law, which does not include the Beth Din. And therefore, if the Beth Din issues a warning, he can still take it to the temple. That's Rabbi Yossi's view. Whereas the sages say, read it as one narrative. It's true we expand the warning to include Beth Din. But the taking to the temple is still a continuation of the narrative where it says, he warns, he takes. And therefore, if he didn't warn, even though it's a valid warning to make her lose a ketubah, it doesn't satisfy the narrative of him taking her to the temple, which was preceded by his warning. Okay. So this is the dispute. Sorry? These are it. Amongst the commentaries, I'm sure.
Why warning? Why two different people?
Oh, you mean the rationale of it?
Right,
the rationale of it.
Why would they argue that? Okay, they argue these positions. So what would?
Okay, so I could argue.
What would
okay.
you see wrong with, or what would the sages see wrong with a different warning?
Okay, so I could argue this way. Well, at the baseline of it, we have the verses, and the verses are enough. But if we want to inject our own logic into it, I could argue this way. Just a suggestion that came to mind since you're asking. We could argue this way. When the Beth Din steps in and issues the warning, what's the purpose of that warning?
Protect the rights of the husband.
So but at the core of it is because the husband is not there, either cognitively or literally. That's the core of it, which means the Beth Din is taking an assumption. What would the husband want?
Yes.
So one thing we know for sure, he wouldn't want to have to be forced to pay out a divorce settlement when she was the one that misbehaved. That we can say safely he would want. The Beth Din steps in.
Yeah.
But can we say that a husband wants to go through the whole proceeding of taking his wife to drink the water, with the whole public affair and the whole embarrassment that comes along with her and him being embarrassed, especially considering that drinking of the water in the same way it tells us that she's guilty, it would tell us if he was guilty. Maybe who said the husband wants that? So if the Beth Din is stepping in on behalf of the husband, then we have to consider what would the husband want? And maybe that's the dispute.
Yeah, maybe that's going too far.
That's right. So perhaps this.
Okay, I don't want to get my responsibility on the.
But I'm not interested in some public spectacle. Exactly. Exactly. So Rabbi Yossi would say, I'm sorry, the sages would say, okay, the minimum of what we know for sure the husband wants is to not pay out a settlement when his wife was misbehaving. Anything more than that, we can't step in. Whereas Rabbi Yossi would say, it's not relevant to his personal feelings. There's a law here, and the law is the law of the Sotah. And if there's a woman who's behaving like a Sotah, she has to go through the proceeding, period. Maybe these are the two sides of the coin. Yeah. Perhaps I'm just suggesting that, but I'm sure there's commentaries that discuss it. Okay, final teaching from the Gemara before the end of the chapter. Our sages taught another Mishnaic age text. The verse reads, at the end of the entire discussion of the Sotah Law, the verse reads, this is the law of the Sotah, Asher tishta ishtoi isha tachas isha. This is the law of the Sotah of a woman who strays from beneath, quote unquote, her husband, isha, her man, her husband, which seems to be a redundant verse. You just described the entire law. It's like a summary. It's like a concluding statement. Such as, goes through all the details. He takes it to the temple. There's the curse. There's drinking. There's the temple. There's their water. Whole details, and it concludes. Such as the law of the woman who strays from beneath her husband, which is nice when you're writing prose, but when you're talking about the verses of Torah, every word's precise. So this is obviously inserted there to teach us something about the law. So explains the Mishnaic text. Lahakish ish leisha. This is coming to compare the law of who qualifies as a husband in the Sotah Law to who qualifies as a woman in the Sotah Law. And likewise, the isha leish, we also do it to compare who qualifies as a wife in the Sotah Law to who qualifies as a husband. So in other words, if there's a disqualifying character for who can be a woman in the Sotah Law, that same disqualifying character applies to the husband. If there's a disqualifying character that belongs to the husband, then that would apply to the woman too. So what are these disqualifying characters? So it says the Gemara, to what law are we talking about? So Amar Rav Sheshes explained. So we've just jumped from the Mishnaic age text to the Gemara's era explaining, analyzing it. Rav Sheshes says as follows: here are the laws that go both directions. Kishem, just as it is, Sh'im Husuma, that if he is blind, lo yoya mashka, if a husband is blind, he's disqualified as being able to be a husband that implements a Sotah Law. Why would it be disqualified? Because the verse reads, she was hidden from the eyes of her husband. That's what the Torah describes the Sotah event, that she was hidden from the eyes of her husband, thus implying that the husband has capable eyes, but she's hiding from them. So, because as we just finished explaining, the verse compares husband to wife, that whatever disqualifies the husband also disqualifies the wife. So because the verse says that the husband has to have eyes that are capable of seeing in order to qualify as a Sotah, so kach so too, her, im hoisa suma, if she was blind, lo hoisa shaisa, she would not drink the Sotah water. Because of the comparative. Following? So look at this. Which detail is that?
Why would it matter whether or not it's wrong?
That's not relevant right now, right? Because now looking at the verse. In other words, before we get to the explanation, let's look at the verses. Now, first, we have to understand what does Torah want, then we can figure out why. Yeah, no, right? So that's first. What is? Understood. Yeah. So what does Torah want? So when Torah gives the narrative of the story of the Sotah, it describes both the husband and wife, and it gives characteristics to the husband and wife. So whatever characteristics apply to the husband in order for him to qualify as Sotah in the Torah narrative, those same characteristics must apply to her because of the verse at the end, which compares husband to wife. So the first characteristic we just met is that the husband has to be able to see. Because when the Torah describes the narrative of the Sotah Law, it says she's hiding from his eyes. She concealed herself from his eyes, implying he has eyes that are capable of seeing. And therefore, the wife also must have eyes that are capable of seeing. Okay. Likewise, Rav Ashi says, just as it is, as a woman who is limp, or a woman who is, God forbid, missing an arm, she couldn't drink the water. Now we're looking at the characteristics on her side, right?
Yeah.
So given the Torah narrative, as we'll see in a moment, she must be a woman who is capable of standing and has hands. How do we know that? Because the Ksiv, the verse reads in describing the narrative of the Sotah Law, Behim, top of Zayin, top of 27b. Behim and HaKoyin as a Isha looking at Hashem, that Koyin, him means he stands her, he places her to be standing in front of God. When she arrives at the temple, the way it described that she has to be positioned in front of the temple, in God's presence, the verse uses the word behimid, and he makes her stand. And therefore, it cannot be a woman who is limp, who is incapable of standing. And likewise, it says, the nosan al kappa, and he puts upon her hand the offering, the meal offering. So again, she has to have hands. So in the Torah narrative describing the Sotah Law, it says that the woman has to be one who has functioning feet and functioning hands. And because we just quoted the verse which says we have to compare the characteristics of the husband to the characteristics of the wife, therefore, so too, if the husband was lame, or the husband was missing an arm, he cannot qualify as a husband that would make his wife drink the Sotah Law. And finally, last characteristic to compare husband and wife, and what the chapter concludes, and I will suggest perhaps a logical rationale for why the verse is doing this.
Well, I have something.
Yeah, okay, so I'll give you the first word. First, let's conclude. Mar bar Rashi Amar, master, son of Rashi, told us, just as it is that a woman who is mute, she would not qualify as a woman that could be a Sotah because she's mute. Because the verse reads, again, describing the narrative of the Sotah Law, the verse reads, after the Kohen gives her this whole speech, that you should know, if you are guilty, you should confess. But if you don't confess, you're going to drink the Sotah Law, and you're going to drink the Sotah water, and it's going to bring upon you all these curses and so on and so forth. The whole speech that he gives her, right? And he tells her about Shimshon. Shimshon failed. Don't worry about it. It's not so terrible if you come clean. There's people before you have messed up, and so on and so on, so on and so forth. So the verse then concludes by saying that she must respond by saying, Amen, Amen. I affirm the warning, which means she has to be capable of speaking. So if she's mute, she does not qualify as a Sotah. And because we just mentioned earlier that the verse compares husband to wife in terms of characteristics, so too, kahu, the same thing is true of him. If he was mute, he could not make her drink the Sotah water, which is interesting because one of the scenarios mentioned before for a husband who's incapable of issuing a warning when the Beth Din steps in is a husband who's mute, right? That was one of the cases. A deaf mute, right? That's the deaf mute, right?
Yeah, he was one of the
and there we had, that's right. And there we had the discussion whether or not the Beth Din can step in. Well, the Beth Din can step in to issue the warning to make her lose a ketubah, but we weren't sure if the Beth Din stepping in makes her go to drink the Sotah. And here we're saying he cannot take her to drink the Sotah. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi, which says that the Beth Din warning is enough to take her to the temple to drink the Sotah water, doesn't apply to all cases because it doesn't apply to the mute case. So does that mean when Rabbi Yossi said that case that when he comes out of jail, did he mean specifically come out of jail, but not the other cases? Or does it go to all cases, as I was suggesting earlier? I'm not sure. If the mute can't take him to drink the water because he doesn't qualify because of this comparison to the wife who needs to be able to speak, certainly the deaf mute can't, right? So maybe then when Rabbi Yossi says that when he comes out of jail, he can take her to the Beth to drink the water, maybe he means specifically only that case. Not like I was suggesting that it means all cases, considering that it cannot mean the case of the mute, unless Mar bar Ravashi here, who says that you have to be non-mute to qualify, is not Rabbi Yossi's opinion. So I'm not 100% sure. I can see it going in a lot of directions. I'm just putting that out there. Okay, so what was your suggested rationale for why the Torah is? Okay. Mm. I like it.
footing. In this case, you have to be on equal footing.
That's right. That's beautiful. So Torah, that's beautiful. Torah is describing marriage as an equal bond between husband and wife. And therefore, even in a case where there's a question of someone messing up, they still must be equal. And therefore, if she's disadvantaged because she's blind, or he's disadvantaged because he's blind, or other way around, we can't put them through this whole ordeal. They must be on equal footing. That's very nice. So I was going to suggest something very similar, which is they already have enough strain on their marriage. If she's blind or he's blind, or she's limp or he's limp, someone's suffering in this kind of way, they have enough strain on their marriage. We have to drag them out to the temple and give them a whole embarrassing procedure. Yeah, look, maybe a combination of the two. But again, we're, at the baseline, is what Torah said, that's the reason. But of course, we're still suggesting. Okay, so this would conclude this tractate, this chapter 4, Hadron Allah Arisa. So I almost, when we get to the end of the tractate, which we still have a few pages to go. But we never speak about politics here at the class, but tonight's event, 8 p.m., Chabad Montreal is hosting a Zoom event of Torah, prayer, and charity. We're going to hear live updates from Rabbi Levi, who's a shliach in Ukraine, who's on the run somewhere. He's going to be up to give us an update on what's going on. And I was thinking about it this morning after a discussion. What news is worthy for him? What news is worthy for me? So you hear all kinds of information about the world. How much of the information is relevant to my life? Truthfully speaking, very little. On the other hand, everything he learns, sees, must serve as a lesson in his life. What's the news coming out of Ukraine? And to me, it seems clear the newsworthy item is, notwithstanding the terrible atrocity that's going on, the world is being flooded with Avas Yisrael. The world is being flooded with love of a fellow Jew. The work of the Chabad Shluchim, who are still, some of them still in Ukraine, literally just baking bread, keeping people alive, as well as the Chabad Shluchim outside, making phone calls to every single known Jew in Ukraine to find out where they are, and spending sometimes $10,000, $15,000 to pay someone to pick up one family to get them out, one person to get them out of Russia, get them out of Ukraine, get them out of harm's way. Love of a fellow Jew. To me, that's the newsworthy item. On a personal level, meaning, of course, everything is newsworthy, but on a personal level, what am I taking home? The flooding of Avos Yisrael. And thinking about myself, because I'm a shliach, right? I'm technically speaking in the same position as these guys out there. Do I have that kind of depth of Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice for my fellow Jew? I sure hope I have it in me. And I hope never be tested. But it's certainly making me think a lot about the level of dedication to our fellow Jew. And I'm talking about on Shabbos. On Shabbos, Chabad rabbi sitting on the phone, calling on Shabbos. On Shabbos, on the phone, calling their known members of the community. Where are you? What are you doing? Do you have bread? Okay, give me your location. Let me find from the shliach who's still there to bring bread to your house. Let me see if I can get a bus to pick you up. I mean, insane things. And it's just the world's being flooded with love of a fellow Jew, and it behooves us to be moved. So more about that tonight, 8 p.m. Ukraine. So please join us. Have a wonderful. Have a good day, Judge. You're muted.